I remember the cold sting of those words as if they were tattooed across my heart. Fred's laugh, once warm and intimate, had turned into a mocking sneer that echoed through the empty spaces of our home. That moment marked a stark transformation in my perception of him, not as my partner, but as someone who viewed me and my passion as trivial, unworthy of respect. I felt diminished, reduced to a mere hobbyist in his eyes, despite the years I had dedicated to crafting a name for myself in the handmade art community. My creations, which had once adorned the shelves of local boutiques and earned accolades at craft shows, suddenly seemed insignificant. Yet, I couldn't let his words deter me. Instead, they fueled a newfound resolve within me. In the days following that painful exchange, my thoughts often wandered to the detective's report tucked away in my drawer. The images of Fred and Mandy, so carefree and complicit in their betrayal, burned in my mind. They were a glaring testament to the life he had chosen away from me. Each photo was a stark reminder that the man I loved was no longer the man I married. Despite the turmoil, I continued my craft. The process of creating something from nothing provided a soothing counterbalance to the chaos of my crumbling marriage. Each piece I made, whether it was a delicately sewn fabric doll or a hand-painted ceramic vase, was a testament to my resilience. My hands, skilled and steady even in the face of heartbreak, wove my silent rebellion against the disdain Fred had shown for my work and for me. The nights grew longer, each one stretching out endlessly as I lay awake, pondering my next move. The idea of confronting Fred was tempting, yet I dreaded the outcome. Would it end in a fiery clash, or would he dismiss my concerns with the same cold indifference he had shown lately? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but the detective's report, with its stark evidence, bolstered my courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my workshop, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Fred, not yet. Instead, I would prepare myself, both emotionally and financially, for whatever lay ahead. The first step was clear: secure my financial independence. The bank, where Fred and I had once worked together, would be my first stop. As I approached the bank the next morning, my heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. I knew the faces there. Some were former colleagues who likely knew of Fred's affair, perhaps even condoning it. But I couldn't let that deter me. I needed to ensure that if I chose to leave Fred, I wouldn't be left adrift, financially vulnerable. The meeting with the bank manager was terse. I explained my need to secure my assets and possibly open a new account solely in my name. As I outlined my requirements, avoiding any unnecessary details about my personal life, I felt a sense of empowerment. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Stepping out of the bank, I felt the cool breeze against my skin, a stark contrast to the stuffy air inside. I was still Candace, the handmade artist, but now, I was also Candace, the woman who wouldn't be mocked or marginalized. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal and emotional battles, no doubt. But as I walked away from the bank, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I was no longer just reacting to Fred's actions. I was taking control of my own narrative. Lying in that hospital bed, the beeping monitors and sterile smell starkly contrasted the warm, cluttered comfort of my workshop. I slowly opened my eyes, finding Stacy's worried face hovering above me. "Candace, thank goodness you're awake. Are you okay? Do you understand what happened?" Her voice was thick with concern, each word laced with fear for my well-being. I nodded slightly, my throat parched and sore, the aftermath of the violent coughing spell still lingering in my body. The events that led to my hospitalization came back in flashes: the argument with Fred, the unbearable stress, and finally, the terrifying moment of collapse. I remember the coughing. I couldn't breathe. I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Stacy gently squeezed my hand, her presence a comforting anchor in the haze of my weakened state. "You had a severe asthma attack, Candace. They brought you here in an ambulance." I was so scared, we all were. Her eyes were rimmed with red, evidence of the tears she had shed on my behalf. As I lay there, the gravity of my situation began to dawn on me. My marriage to Fred, once a source of joy and partnership, had deteriorated to a point of severe emotional and now physical distress. The man who used to support and cherish my artistic endeavors had become a stranger, his indifference and mockery pushing me to my limits. I spent the next few days in the hospital under observation, each passing hour a mix of pain, reflection, and a growing resolve. The solitude of the hospital room gave me too much time to think about Fred, our past happiness, and the stark, painful reality of our present. Despite everything, a part of me still ached for the love we once shared, but another, stronger part of me knew that I could not let this situation define my life. During one particularly quiet night, as I stared at the moonlight filtering through the blinds, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of a man who no longer respected me, nor could I allow myself to be so emotionally and physically compromised again. I needed to protect myself, both legally and financially. The decision to divorce, once a distant thought, now seemed the only viable path forward. It was not about revenge, it was about self-preservation and reclaiming the peace and respect I deserved. I would need to gather evidence, consult with a lawyer, and prepare myself for the challenges ahead. Once discharged, my first stop was not home, but to the bank. Armed with determination, I initiated the necessary steps to secure my financial independence. I opened a new account in my name only, redirected my earnings from my artwork, and started setting aside funds for potential legal fees. Walking out of the bank, a sense of empowerment washed over me. It was as if with each step, I was walking back into myself, Candace, the artist, the creator, the woman who deserved so much more than what she had been given. As I moved forward, I knew the road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face it head-on, with my head held high. Seeing my condition, Stacy quickly came to my side, her eyes wide with concern. "Candace, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, gently taking the phone from my trembling hands to read the message herself. Her face darkened as she read Fred's words, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "It's okay, Stacy," I managed to say between my tears and involuntary chuckles. "It's just so absurd, isn't it? After everything." My voice trailed off as another wave of laughter mixed with sobs escaped me. It was a bizarre reaction, perhaps a defense mechanism against the sheer cruelty and absurdity of the situation. Stacy put my phone down and hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry, Candace. You don't deserve any of this." Her voice was firm, her embrace a solid presence in the swirling chaos of my emotions. "He's shown his true colors, Candace. It's hard, but maybe it's for the best. You're seeing the real Fred now." I nodded, my head resting against her shoulder. The truth of her words pierced through the fog of my confusion and hurt. Fred's lack of empathy and harsh dismissal of my condition and our marriage were clearer than ever. He had decided to abandon our vows over a situation I had no control over, using my illness and financial status against me. As Stacy and I sat in silence, I felt a strange sense of relief mingling with my sorrow. The facade was gone, and with it, the weight of trying to salvage something that was perhaps beyond repair. "I need to think about my next steps," I said, more to myself than to Stacy. "Not just with the divorce, but my life, my art, everything." Stacy nodded. "We'll figure it out together," she reassured me, squeezing my hand. "Let's focus on getting you home and healthy first. Then we can tackle everything one step at a time." The next couple of days in the hospital provided me with time to reflect. Despite the pain of betrayal and the looming challenges of a divorce, I felt a growing resolve to rebuild my life on my terms. The support from Stacy was invaluable, and I knew I had other friends and family who would stand by me too. When the day of my discharge arrived, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Leaving the hospital felt symbolic, like stepping into a new chapter of my life. Stacy was there to pick me up, her car filled with my favorite flowers and a playlist of songs we both loved. As we drove away from the hospital, I looked back at the building that had been my refuge and prison for the last week. The road ahead was uncertain, and though I was physically weaker, something within me had grown stronger. The battle ahead with the divorce and redefining my identity would be tough, but I was not going to face it alone. As we discussed plans for a small gathering with close friends and a strategy session for my next steps, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. With each mile we drove away from the hospital, I felt a little more of the old Candace returning, the one who believed in the beauty of her dreams and the value of her work, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Continued communication from Fred painted a clear picture of his intentions. Each message, laden with condescension and a lack of empathy, only reinforced my decision. It was a stark reminder of the emotional chasm that had formed between us. He seemed to believe that without him, I would struggle, perhaps even fail. His words, meant to demean, instead fortified my resolve. "You probably have no assets," he had written, his tone dismissive. I couldn't help but smile bitterly at the irony. All these years, I had indeed managed our finances prudently, ensuring that my earnings from my artwork, though modest compared to his, contributed significantly to our joint assets. Fred's underestimation of me was both his mistake and my advantage. Stacy, seeing the latest barrage of messages, was furious. "Can you believe this, Candace?" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "He truly thinks he's left you with nothing, that you can't manage on your own." I nodded, my mind racing with thoughts of the future. "I've got my art, my skills, and most importantly, my dignity. I'm not the helpless person he thinks I am. I've already started setting up my new life, piece by piece." As I spoke, I felt a surge of empowerment. The fear and uncertainty that had clouded my thoughts were slowly dissipating, replaced by a clarity and determination I hadn't felt in years. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was no longer the person who feared standing alone. The next day, I met with a lawyer to discuss my situation. The pre-signed divorce petition was an unusual arrangement, and I needed legal advice on how to proceed. "It's not a common practice," the lawyer explained after reviewing the documents. "But given that it's been executed with both signatures, it's technically valid. However, the context here changes things. We can contest his use of it based on your current circumstances and his intentions." I listened intently, absorbing every detail. The legality of our pre-signed agreement had been a safety net, a mutual understanding and respect that had clearly eroded on Fred's side. Now, it felt more like a noose than a safety measure. After the meeting, I walked out of the lawyer's office, feeling strangely liberated. Fred had intended to use the pre-signed petition as a swift means to rid himself of a situation he no longer wanted to be part of. But in doing so, he had unintentionally freed me from my doubts and fears about ending our marriage. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. My art, which had always been my solace, now became my mainstay. I threw myself into my work, creating pieces that reflected my journey, a mix of turmoil and triumph. The response was overwhelming. The authenticity of my work resonated with people, bringing new opportunities and recognition my way. Stacy was a constant presence, supporting me through the legal battles and personal upheavals. "Once this is all over, we'll celebrate," she promised, her words a balm to the weariness that occasionally crept up on me. Fred's messages continued, each one more detached than the last, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. I was moving forward, building a life marked not by what I had lost, but by what I had found in myself. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited for what the future held. I was going to let Fred have the last word, not after everything he had done. As I shared a conspiratorial grin with Stacy, a plan began to form in my mind, a way to reclaim my narrative and perhaps give Fred a taste of his own medicine. "No, I'm not letting it end here," I said, my voice laced with newfound determination. "He's trying to paint me as the villain in our breakup, but I know the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone else does too." Stacy nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "That's the spirit, Candace. You have your art, your voice, and your integrity. Let's turn this situation around. How about a public exhibition of your work? You can showcase the pieces that symbolize your journey, your pain, and your resilience." The idea resonated with me instantly. An exhibition would not only be a personal catharsis, but also a public statement. I could use my art to tell my story, to express the emotions and experiences I couldn't convey in words. That's perfect, I said, excitement bubbling within me. And each piece will have a story card explaining its significance, the truth about what I was going through when I created it. Stacy clapped her hands, delighted. I love it. And we can invite everyone, your friends, colleagues, local art critics, and even the press. Let the art speak for itself. It'll be a hit. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into my work with an intensity one hadn't felt in years. Each piece I created was more than just art, it was a piece of my soul, a narrative of my struggles and triumphs. Stacy was instrumental in organizing the event, using her contacts in real estate and the local business community to find the perfect venue and drum up interest. The exhibition was set in a charming gallery downtown, with wide, welcoming spaces that were perfect for storytelling through art. The invitations were sent out, and the buzz around the event grew. I was nervous, but exhilarated by the opportunity to redefine the narrative that Fred had tried to impose on me. On the night of the exhibition, the gallery was bustling with guests. The walls were adorned with my creations, each accompanied by a story card that detailed its significance. People moved from piece to piece, reading my stories, experiencing my journey. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing admiration not only for the art but for my courage in sharing such a personal journey. Midway through the evening, I overheard snippets of conversation, people discussing not only the art but also the revelations about my marriage. I had no idea Candace was going through all this, someone said. Fred really had us all fooled. As the evening drew to a close, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and liberation. I had taken the pain that Fred inflicted and turned it into something beautiful and empowering. The gallery was filled with supporters and new admirers who now understood my story, my truth. Stacy squeezed my shoulder, her smile wide and proud. You did it, Candace. You took back your story. Yes, I did, I replied, looking around at the crowded room, the walls speaking my truth. And this is just the beginning. With my art and my voice, I had turned a painful end into a promising new beginning, one brushstroke at a time. I continued speaking, keeping my tone even and calm, despite the whirl of emotions inside me. Yes, I didn't tell you because I thought it would hurt your high pride. Even though you belittled my craft, it was actually a thriving business. I was the president of a company that not only supported me but employed hundreds of others. Fred's face had turned an ashen color, a mix of surprise and disbelief marring his features. Beside him, Mandy appeared equally stunned, her earlier composure slipping as she realized the gravity of what I was doing. But, why are you doing this? Fred finally managed to choke out, his voice a mixture of frustration and confusion. I'm doing this because it's time I took control of my life and my assets. Your actions showed me the importance of being independent and protecting my interests, I explained, my voice steady but firm. It's not just about revenge, Fred. It's about making a decision that's best for my company and for me. Moving the accounts is a business decision, one that I should have made a long time ago. The bank was buzzing with whispers and the clicking of keyboards as employees behind the counter scrambled to understand the impact of losing such a large account. I could feel the eyes of other customers on us, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Mandy, regaining some of her professional demeanor, began the process of closing the accounts. I'll need to verify all the details and the authorization for this action, she said, her voice slightly shaky. Of course, I replied, pulling out a folder filled with all the necessary documentation, corporate seals, and my identification as the company's president. Everything you need is right here. As I handed over the documents, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. This was not just a financial move, it was a statement. I was no longer the woman Fred could mock and underestimate. I was taking bold steps, not just in my personal life, but in my professional world as well. Fred tried to speak to me again, his approach hesitant. Candace, can we talk about this? Maybe over coffee? There has to be a way to resolve this without such drastic measures. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since our divorce proceedings began. Fred, there's nothing left to discuss. You made your decisions, and now I'm making mine. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about my company and my responsibilities to my employees. Turning back to Mandy, I gave her a nod to continue with the transaction. As the bank staff busied themselves with the closures, I felt a chapter closing, a chapter where I was underestimated and undervalued. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter, as if I had finally shed a weight that had been holding me back. I was ready to face the future, not just as an artist, but as a successful businesswoman. With each step, I was moving further away from my past with Fred and towards a new, promising horizon. That our personal situation might be different, but I assure you, the issues were much more complex than just simple household disagreements or financial irresponsibility, Fred interjected, his voice shaky as he attempted to assert some control over the narrative. Mr. Manning raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting between Fred and me with a scrutinizing intensity. Well, Fred, that may be so, but having known Candace for years, I find it hard to believe she'd change so drastically without good reason, he replied, his tone even but firm. Mandy, who had been mostly silent up until now, seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Her eyes darted around the room, perhaps seeking an escape from the awkward and revealing conversation. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was unwittingly caught in a situation much larger and more complex than she likely anticipated when she entered the relationship with Fred. Yes, things have indeed been complicated, I spoke up, eager to add clarity and assert my own voice in the narrative. Our marriage faced many challenges, some of which were deeply personal and painful. It's unfortunate that it ended this way, but I am focusing on moving forward positively, both personally and professionally. Mr. Manning nodded, his expression softening. That's a healthy outlook, Candace. It's good to see you handling this with such dignity and grace. It's more than just ending a relationship, it's about how you rebuild afterwards. I smiled, grateful for his understanding and support. Thank you. It means a lot to hear that, especially from someone who has always held high standards both in work and personal integrity. The conversation shifted then, as Mr. Manning began to inquire about my business. I explained how I had expanded my company, now employing over 800 people, and how we specialized in high-quality, handcrafted goods that had gained a certain reputation in the market. Fred and Mandy listened, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity as they learned about the scale and success of my enterprise, a side of me Fred had never acknowledged or perhaps even understood. As the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Manning stood, offering his hand to me. It's been enlightening, Candace. I'm impressed by what you've built and even more by how you've handled these recent challenges. Let's not wait for another crisis to catch up again. Thank you, Mr. Manning. I appreciate your time and your kind words today, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. We left the room together, leaving Fred and Mandy behind to process the conversation. As we walked down the hallway, Mr. Manning's parting words resonated with me. Remember, Candace, true success is measured not just by what you achieve, but by how you overcome the obstacles in your path. As I stepped back into the main area of the bank, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and strength. Whatever Fred and Mandy might have thought or expected from me, I knew I was on a path that honored my values and my vision for the future. And with each step forward, I was not just moving away from my past, but towards a new horizon filled with possibilities. As Fred and Mandy scrambled to manage the unfolding situation, I remained composed, fueled by the validation of Mr. Manning's support and the clarity of my own records and facts. You're forgetting something very important, I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the cacophony of their desperate protests. Both of them looked at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and apprehension. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on the table in front of me, the thick document from the detective agency a testament to my preparedness. You seem to forget that I was not just a wife blindsided by an affair. I was a partner in a marriage where mutual respect and honesty were promised, and more critically, I was a professional in this very industry. Fred's face paled, and Mandy seemed to shrink a little in her seat. It was clear that the reality of the situation was finally dawning on them. Their actions had consequences, and their attempts to paint themselves as victims were failing miserably in the light of undeniable evidence and witness. I know how banks work, Fred. I know what losing several hundred salary accounts means for this branch and for you. You see, the trust one placed in this bank was based on a personal connection that no longer exists, thanks to your actions, I continued, my tone firm yet devoid of malice. It was a simple statement of fact, and its impact was evident in Fred's defeated slouch. And to think, I added, turning slightly to address Mandy with a look of cold precision, that you believed undermining me would have no repercussions. It's not just about the money or the accounts, it's about integrity and respect, something you both compromised. Mr. Manning, who had been observing quietly, nodded in agreement. It's clear you've thought this through, Candace. Your decisions are not just emotional reactions, but well-considered business moves. It's impressive, truly. Fred finally found his voice, a mix of frustration and plea evident in his tone. Candace, please, let's discuss this. Maybe there's a way to handle this without such drastic measures. I looked at him, feeling a final shift within me, a move from the pain he caused to a recognition of my own resilience and worth. Fred, our time for discussions passed when you decided to file for divorce without a genuine attempt at resolution. My decisions today are about protecting my interests and those of my employees. I wish you had shown the same consideration. With that, I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Thank you, Mr. Manning, for your support today. It was more helpful than you can imagine. Turning to leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, not because I had won some battle, but because I had stood up for myself and my future. As I walked out of the bank, the finality of the moment was not lost on me. This was more than just a closure of accounts, it was a closure of a painful chapter in my life. Now, it was time to step into a new phase, one where I was not just surviving, but thriving. As I left the bank, the whole scenario replaying in my mind felt surreal, like a scene straight out of a drama, yet it was my life. The absurdity of Fred's pleas and Mandy's outbursts was stark against the backdrop of their actions, which had serious consequences not just for them but for the bank as well. Driving away, I felt a mixture of relief and empowerment. The chapter that had consumed so much of my emotional energy was closing, and in its place, a new sense of freedom and opportunity was emerging. I realized that the end of my marriage, though fraught with challenges, had paved the way for a rebirth of my independence and self-respect. I spent the next few days focusing on my business, planning expansions, and exploring new markets for my handicrafts. My employees were enthusiastic about the growth and the new direction we were taking. The sense of community and shared goals within my company contrasted sharply with the isolation and deceit I had experienced in my marriage. Late one evening, as I reviewed some designs, my phone rang. It was Mr. Manning. Candace, just wanted to update you. The board didn't take long to make a decision. Given the situation and the evidence, Fred and Mandy have been dismissed. Their actions were found to be too damaging to the bank's reputation and operations. Thank you for handling this, Mr. Manning, I replied, feeling a sense of closure. It's unfortunate that it came to this, but I appreciate your swift and fair handling of the situation. After hanging up, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony of Fred's situation. He had called multiple times, each voicemail more desperate than the last, suggesting we reunite now that he was divorcing Mandy. Each message went unanswered. Stacy and I would review the messages, chuckling at the absurdity of his pleas. It wasn't just about schadenfreude, it was about recognizing how far I had come from the woman who might have fallen for such pleas once again. Moreover, Fred's attempt to claim a share of my company's assets through the divorce was swiftly countered by my attorney. The company was my endeavor, started and scaled after our marriage had effectively ended, and legally insulated from our marital assets. The court's decision reinforced my independence and the foresight I had in protecting my business. As I moved forward, my life began to fill with new interests and social engagements. I attended galleries, joined new business networks, and even started a small foundation to support other women entrepreneurs in the handicraft industry. The support and admiration from the community were immensely gratifying and reinforced my decision to focus on my personal and professional growth. Divorce, I realized, was not just an end but a beginning. It had freed me from a relationship that had stifled my growth and self-worth. Now, I was flourishing, not in spite of my past, but because I had faced it head-on and moved beyond it. My days were busy, fulfilling, and mine alone to shape. I was investing in myself, in relationships that were genuine, and in a future that looked brighter than I could have ever imagined. Fred's attempts to reconnect were just echoes of a past that no longer held sway over me. I was building a life on my own terms, valuing myself more each day, and for the first time